It's the internet. You're busy. Let's do this. I'm Jeff Grubb. I write for GamesBeat.com. And the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X are here. So let's look backward. Let's talk about the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. I want to look backward because when I boot up the PlayStation 5, which I have now finally, and the Xbox Series X or even the Xbox Series S, the good things about these consoles, all the things that make these consoles very good, feel like they are directly addressing and directly responding to all of the failures of the PS4 and the Xbox One. And so now now that we have these next gen consoles and we are able to experience them and see what see what gaming can be on a console, to me it feels like it is time to admit that the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One were bad. Now, when I say that they're bad, I don't mean that the games were bad. And I understand that it's like that's a distinction that a lot of people won't necessarily get right away. It feels contradictory. If the games were good, then the generation was good, right? And yeah, sure, yeah, absolutely. But I'm talking about the hardware and the experience that the hardware presented to the gamer. Was that good? And to me, I think the answer very clearly was no. And, personally, the answer was absolutely not. And that is why I felt pushed away by consoles toward PC gaming, specifically because of the experience of these consoles provided. Xbox One and PlayStation 4, they're slow hard drives, they're weak CPUs. They looked really bad in comparison to the space that was embracing performance and SSDs and all kinds of cutting edge technologies, where it was like, if you want to have a good gaming experience, like the games are, they're the same games everywhere. But if you want them to perform well and you want them to load quickly and you want to get them cheaper on Steam or whatever, there's all kinds of, reasons to go to PC, but it was just like overall the experience was better because of the upfront investment and the lack thereof from Microsoft and from Sony into these last gen consoles. So the two biggest issues are the CPU and the hard drive. The CPU in both of these systems were Jaguar cores from AMD that were kind of made for tablets, kind of made for netbooks, really, really cheap laptops. They were weak and bad. They were bad then, and they just got worse and worse as time went on in terms of the relative performance. The hard drives were, I think, kind of both laptop hard drives, very slow 5400 RPM drives that, they lasted pretty long for the most part. And that's the best thing you could say about them. Other than that, they were real garbage, real trash, really one of the most upsetting things of going back to the consoles anytime over the last 7 years was having to go back and deal with those really slow hard drives in a world that had quickly embraced SSDs after SSDs became the norm on PC. It was just, the iPhone got an SSD in like 2015. And so still dealing with that hard drive was absurd. So what specifically was bad about them? This is stuff we know. The hard drive made the hard drive and the CPU made the user interface on the Xbox One feel really clunky. Loading in games in your library took a really long time. Updating games on the PlayStation 4 was pretty bad because you would download the games and that would take some time, and that was partially due to PSN infrastructure, but also partially due to just the slow processor inside of the PS4. And then once you got it, you had to copy the whole thing because you had to replace the whole file because the hard drive needs to have it read in a certain order to make sure that the game can, once it's on your hard drive, it can load faster than what it would be otherwise, which is still very slow. And just game loads in general, excruciating. Everyone knows this, and I think if you were just playing console games, it was very easy to accept this as the norm. But very quickly, 2015, my games were on an SSD on a PC, and they were taking 10 seconds to load compared to a minute. A lot of times, smaller games were taking less than that, 5 seconds to load. But I'm talking experiential here, right? And that means, the same game on PC and consoles, and maybe the experience is slightly worse on consoles, but oh well, it's a lot more affordable. And so there's bound to be some sacrifices. But it's not just about the experience of getting into a game and then the performance, which we'll talk about being whatever. The weak CPU has really held back gaming as well. I'll put it this: the hard drive held back the kinds of games that developers were already making, open world games that wanted to load a lot of data really fast, and developers are already making those kinds of games. And so when they want to expand what they're already doing, the thing that they are most bumping up against is the hard drive and its slow speed. And that makes sense. So it makes sense that SSD was very much emphasized by both Sony and Microsoft. But the CPU limited the kinds of games that developers even attempted to make. A better CPU is not going to magically improve artificial intelligence or the complexity of world simulations. These are possibilities. It's going to require a lot of work from engineers and designers to actually fulfill the possibility space. But the problem with the PS4 and the Xbox One is developers didn't even attempt to solve those problems because the juice would not have been worth the squeeze. It would not have been worth the effort, because even if you did create a game that could have a certain level of complexity to really push the CPU, the Xbox One and PS4 would not be able to handle it in the first place. So on the PC, we missed out on maybe some big games that might, from these big publishers, from really clever teams at these big publishers that do want to push this stuff forward. They're not even going to invest in that because it's not worth it to them. But again, we're talking about mostly the same games. And, I'm talking about it with the CPU. It's like, if, maybe, possibilities, things like that. So maybe that's not a convincing argument. But the thing that we could see in front of us are the visuals, the graphics of games. And for the most part, games on consoles looked pretty good, right? They even look pretty close to what they look like on PC. It's hard to see the difference a lot of times. And I think that's absolutely true. But performance is something that once you start playing the game and you're not just looking at a screenshot or not just watching something on YouTube, the performance is noticeable. So even as we were getting games that looked pretty good in screenshots on Xbox One and PS4, they really kind of fell down once you started playing them. Now, of course, huge exceptions to this. Games like Naughty Dog's Last of Us Part 2, or anything from Naughty Dog, really, or Gears 5 from the Coalition looked really good on Xbox. These are absolute examples of technical wizardry from really talented teams. And that was always possible on these systems because really we're at a point where if you put enough money and time and effort towards something, you can accomplish it on even the Xbox One and the PS4. The problem was multi-platform games and like games that were supposed to hit a wide audience across a wide breadth of devices. So like the Assassin's Creed games often look really nice, but the performance always felt sluggish on PS4 and Xbox One. And it became really clear really quick in 2013, 2014, when we were talking about like 1080p, 900p, 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second. We put a lot of emphasis on 1080p 60 early in the generation, something we were talking about even on Xbox 360 and PS3. And that was never really even in the cards. That was never something that those consoles were good at. And it took mid-generation refreshes to even kind of make that possible. But those mid-generation refreshes are also bad for maybe different reasons. Now, they still have the same CPU and the same hard drive. So, no, bad for the same reasons. But when we're talking about visuals, there were some serious improvements there with the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X. I almost said Series X. And that comes down to like philosophy almost. I think a lot of people, when they saw those consoles, they're like, okay, those consoles exist because of 4K. And no, that's not why they exist. Those consoles exist to give Microsoft and Sony a justification to continue selling the Xbox and PlayStation branded hardware at $400 and $500. They were getting to a point in, midway through the generation where it was very clear that the consoles they were selling were not worth $400 and $500 or whatever. And so as we got late in the generation, they wanted to have something that was, that felt like a high quality, a premium product. And so they worked backwards from that motivation. And they're like, what can we do? What can we create that it screams like, oh, I'm still something that is worth $400. I'm still something that is worth $500. And they settled on 4K because 4K is still a really catchy, it was then, still is now, a really catchy buzzword for marketing where people associate that with whiz bang next gen tech. It's what all TVs need to be. It's the future, and we know it takes a lot of processing power to do that. So it's really impressive if something can do 4K. Consoles or strong, powerful PCs still struggle with 4K. It's something that's still true today. The Pro and the One X, they didn't fundamentally rework the underlying issues that were holding back those consoles. Obviously, the hard drives were still slow, the CPU was still weak, and this, it still reduced what was possible in terms of complexity of the worlds. And even if you did try to add an SSD into those systems, the CPU was still so slow that it wasn't fast enough to take advantage of the power of an SSD, because the CPU would struggle to retrieve data off of it. Yeah, they're miserable consoles. They are. They really are. And if you spent the last 7 years gaming on one of them or both of them, look, I'm sure you played some awesome games, and there's no way I could take that away from you, and I'm not trying to. Mostly what I'm trying to say is, boy, am I relieved that the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X are here. The PS4 and Xbox One were a mistake. Almost. Yeah, they were a mistake. They were a mistake. They were Sony and Microsoft misjudging the market. Microsoft thought it was going to be all about TV and selling movies and becoming a marketplace for stuff beyond games, and that was where they were really going to make their money. And Sony just kind of was on autopilot a little bit because they're like, we're going to make another PlayStation, but people aren't going to buy it, right? No, like PS3 did okay, but and it pulled it out there at the end once the price started to drop and there was a ton of games. But there's no one, like, now that the price is dropping a little bit more, that audience that like came and bought the PS2 when the PS2 dropped to like $200, $150, they aren't showing up. Those people are all buying cell phones and they're all buying tablets, and that is where they're playing their games. So clearly the market's smaller than it's ever been. So really, how much do we want to invest in this? And do we want to like invest in creating the games necessary to get people excited about it? No. And so they made a mistake because that was wrong. It was incorrect. The people who play console games now spend a lot of money on it. They are influential in terms of getting other people excited about console games. And this was all stuff that Microsoft and Sony did not predict. A lot of people were kind of misreading the tea leaves at this point. And, there was absolute talk about the last console generation at that point. And so we ended up with a pair of consoles that just were afraid of the future and afraid of wasting money on something that wasn't going to work out. And I'm glad that was wrong. I'm glad it didn't work out, but it meant that we were really stuck with some really shoddy hardware for quite some time. And now I think lessons learned, they've corrected it. They've corrected it. Absolutely. The PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X and S, like I said at the top, directly address the failures of the last gen. Fast CPU, fast SSD, even more powerful, GPU. Both sides went with really powerful GPUs. Assassin's Creed runs at 60 frames per second on these consoles. Now there's some tearing issues right now, but I'm not too concerned about that in the long term. And I hope that every Assassin's Creed game going forward runs at 60 frames per second as well. I think we should expect that now for real, in a way that it was never real on the last generation. At the risk of definitely repeating myself, I'm relieved. It is nice to have consoles made by companies that clearly believe in making console gaming work well into the future. At this point, I think the future of console gaming is still questionable in terms of like what does next generation look like after this. But I don't think anyone thinks it's going to evaporate. The money is clearly going to keep coming in. There is going to be an audience, and it's a growing audience of people who care about this stuff. And it just so happens that it's primarily a hardcore audience. Even when we think of like the casual gamer, that's someone playing 10 hours of Fortnite a week and spending money on microtransactions. Can you call that person casual? I don't think so. So I think everyone's feeling really good about starting this new generation. And I think all of us as people who play games on consoles should be the most excited, because we are going to get the benefits of these companies spending a lot of money to not make the same mistakes that they did last time. And that is a very good thing after a couple of bad things. All right. That does it for me. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, let me know in the comments. If you have some different ideas, if you disagree with this, I want to hear that too. If you want to defend the consoles, by all means, please. I think that my perspective here might be very singular in that I really did go to PC gaming very hard and resented the Xbox One and the PS4 pretty hard for kind of their failings. One of the reasons I was so excited about the Switch kind of just figured out a way that I wanted to play games that no one else was, and did it in a really kind of just straightforward and satisfactory way. And boy, I still love playing games on my Switch in a way I never loved playing games on the Xbox One or PS4. So yeah. Okay. That does it for me. Thank you for watching, everybody. Take care of yourself. Until next time, have a good one, and goodbye.